I am so excited to be here. What a beautiful campus and what a warm community it is here. From the initial conversations until now, I just can't get enough of how much I have been inspired. I bring you greetings from First Repair. We're in Evanston, Illinois. I bring you greetings from the national and international community of reparations thought leaders, activists, advocates, and practitioners. I want to hope to leave you encouraged, inspired, and directed, knowing that you are the future of reparations, and our fight for reparations really is for you and the generations to come. I must give a special thank you to President Timothy Sams, as well as Professor Kevin Orksgerson, and the incredible Politics, Economics, and Law Club, the students. Thank you so much for your warm welcome. Thank you to the scholars, all of you scholars, the futures that will lead us to reparations. I'm going to jump into my presentation. So reparations, as mentioned, it is in great momentum. There's a lot of debate around reparations, even the definition of reparations. But one thing that we usually agree on, whether we disagree on forms of reparations or eligibility or so on, is a broad, comprehensive definition. The process of repairing, healing, and restoring a people who were injured due to their group identity in violation of their fundamental human rights by a government, corporation, institution, or individual. So as we talk about reparations, we usually talk about the sense of government's responsibility to address the crimes against Black people, the harms against the humanity of Black people. But we also want to broaden our thought and commitment of reparations to other institutions like universities. We're seeing more of that happen. Also industries, business, banking, individual families and foundations as well. And so I just want to open up this conversation with a broad, comprehensive look at reparations, on who is eligible and how that remedy can be implemented. So we'll go through a really quick, brief history of reparations, and it's important because as we are getting into momentum and more municipalities like my own city of Evanston passing a local reparations initiative, and now 112 cities across the United States taking a step towards repair with a legislative action like Evanston did. We're seeing states like the great state of California, and understand New York has some progress happening with reparations. We're seeing more institutions like Harvard recently committing $100 million, and others like Georgetown and Brown and more universities beginning their harm reports. Even traveling, we traveled just a few months ago to Cambridge in the UK, where that institution has begun its slavery inquiries and its work. But this is a long, protracted fight. We have been fighting for reparations in this nation for over 400 years in some way. We are in great momentum now, and for that, we're very encouraged. It's not a novel concept. And because of time, I'll leave these slides to be shared with the community. We won't be able to go through each of the incidents, but it's not a novel concept. We have incidents over the centuries, contemporary historically incidents of us fighting for reparations through a legislative example, through a judicial example. And here we have that timeline. All of these tools and resources, so that you know, are available as a toolkit and public resource at firstrepair.org. You could look at it in greater detail. But here you can see more of the notable and noteworthy applications of reparations. Even in our own city, and I get so much sort of credit for leading the passing in Evanston, even that started with the foundation in Evanston that started in 2002. All of us working on reparations are building on the legacy of work from others that came before us, building on the important work of Callie House and Queen Mother Audley Moore, even Martin Luther King and Malcolm X led us to a reparative justice type of leadership, a demand for repair. We all know of Dr. King's call for insufficient funds and a check due by the United States government. But in Evanston, we had a reparations resolution that was passed in 2002. And so I'd like to acknowledge that this didn't just leap up out of nowhere. I'm not the genius that defined reparations, not in the least bit. I was led by and following a community of leaders, in this case, Judge Lionel Jean-Baptiste, who passed a reparations legislation that called to action a federal policy. So it didn't call to action what we're doing now, but I was able to use that as an example of our values and what we were responsible to do. And so I hope that as you all are entering into your spaces of activism and practicing justice and leadership and advocacy, that you are acknowledging the important work that has happened before each of us and building on that work. In the reparations conversation, there's a lot of debate about forms of reparations. And you may have seen in the news an exciting recommendation from from the San Francisco Task Force for $5 million for reparations, a cash benefit for Black folks in San Francisco. But there are many forms. We generally only talk about cash or a check, some form of compensation. There are 5 forms of reparations under international law standards. This came out of the conference of the Conference Against Racism that happened in Durban in 2001. And so know that now, us at First Repair, having physically been in 40 different cities, having town halls, hearing from Black residents on what reparations demands do we want, how can our cities repair the harms of Jim Crow era law and segregation, racism that's baked into our current public policy that looks like equity and inclusion, but is actually anti-Black. How do we repair this harm? And it's not just a cash check or restitution or compensation. Black communities are coming back looking for full repair, which includes satisfaction. Satisfaction, I would say, is the area of reparations that we're seeing the most success in. That's going to be the acknowledgments, the apologies, the monuments, Black history, and education. That's an area where we're seeing thus low-hanging fruit, street namings, and so on. We're seeing that, and that is an important first step towards repair, that acknowledgement and that apology. Compensation is what we talk about most, some form of a cash benefit, some other sort of tangible redress. Restitution, very similarly, grants, and so on. Guarantee of non-repetition or cessation is probably the foundation of where we need to begin reparations work, and that is policy reform. How do we address the anti-Black policy that is keeping us in these sustained conditions with these growing and widening racial gaps? How do we address that? And then rehabilitation is an area that truly comes up when we're engaged with community. When we're talking to Black community, what do we want? How do we want to repair our community? It comes with often an effort or an interest in restoring our own healing, repairing the trauma that we experience as Black people. Whether it is inherited through transgenerational epigenetics, the harm is in our genes, we are experiencing trauma that we haven't even witnessed. We are inheriting it from our ancestors, or the trauma that we experience just being Black in America, microaggressions, police terror, so on. So these are areas of reparations that we're hearing from Black community. And then the institutions. We talked about the institutions that are responsible, not just the United States government, and our goals for H.R. 40 that was first introduced in 1989 by Rep. Don Conyers and traditionally reintroduced every year, still with no House vote since 1989. Not just Congress, but also every level of government, municipal, state, county, has a responsibility to repair. Corporations, individuals, institutions, and we talked about that. So here are some examples of what we're looking to repair in our cities. Yes, we are looking to repair the crimes of the transatlantic slave trade, but also all of its legacies and vestiges, which looked like Jim Crow era law, redlining, over-policing, the war on drugs, mass incarceration, police violence, predatory lending. We could do this all day, unfortunately, as it relates to harm in Black community. But specifically, I pulled out 3 cities that are pretty notable. Evanston, for being the first, is looking at addressing anti-Black zoning laws. Today, we have zoning laws that are still anti-Black, responsible for our celebrated diversity, but actual segregation. I today live in a community, the community that I was born and raised in, a beautiful community that's full of love. It is my village. I left there thinking that I could do and accomplish all things, but I did that with less access to everything. I did that with environmental injustices and air quality issues. I did that without access to green space, in a neighborhood school having to be bused, without having access to healthy foods, even today in 2023, having passed reparations. So I like to keep it very real and note that we have a long way ahead, and we can pause and celebrate a milestone and a victory, but we have to acknowledge the fight is present and it is every day. The next is Amherst, Massachusetts. So Amherst was the second city to pass a municipal reparations initiative. And what I appreciate about Amherst, I use it as an example because it had very different set of circumstances. Very small Black community, but it had a white woman, an ally in the white community that felt a call to action from her community that there was a responsibility for the ally community to step up and commit to reparations, educate themselves, educate their communities, and begin giving. And I use Tulsa as an example because what an extreme case of an incident that was anti-Black. The plunder, the theft, the murder, the violence against Black wealth, and the potential of what Tulsa and other cities like Tulsa could have been for America. That race massacre is still looking to be redressed. Tulsa has still not even given a proper acknowledgement of the harm. Today has still not even given an apology. So we stand in solidarity with a community of leaders in Tulsa, Oklahoma that fights for reparations today. There are some other judicial efforts for reparations that are happening in Tulsa, Oklahoma as well, giving examples. And I am sure I have yet to go to any city, any community that does not have some history of anti-Blackness, some legacy or vestige of slavery, and I would even challenge your own cities wherever you come from, including the city that I'm in. This is an example of the redlining map in Evanston. I use Evanston as an example because it was the instigator for me. It was being a Black Evanstonian, a Black woman that had the experience of being excluded, living in a community that literally wins awards for its diversity. But yet, at the time that I made this introduction on City Council, we had huge wealth gaps, and that was before the pandemic. And those wealth gaps have only widened since then. This map is important because it's historic, but it also is the same map today if I was to show you the concentrated Black community, the most disinvestment, the least community amenities still today in 2023, although fair housing was passed in 1968. This is an example of the wealth gap in Evanston. This is a list of some of the cities. It's a dated list, but this is a list of some of the cities that we've worked with to pass reparations in their cities. And so what I love about this word cloud is these are just raw feedback. This is examples of what Black residents, when we went and began our town hall, said, what does reparations mean to you? How do you want to be repaired for the harm? And it started with all types of feedback on discrimination, specific incidents, what happened to my family, oral history being passed down. It started with the outpouring of pain and terror and discrimination from the Black community. But the responses were here: free college, wealth transfer, policy reform, rent control, health care, reparations, cash, education, so on, home ownership, mental health, genealogy, repatriation. Some folks want access to West Africa and the continent, want to know where we came from, want to learn where our lineage takes us. For me personally, my reparations included learning that, having a DNA report and genealogy report to learn that my foremother was kidnapped from what is now Guinea-Bissau, West Africa, and traveling there after I retired from my elected role and spending 2 weeks in the villages with the specific tribe of Balanta, the people of who I am. That was part of my own personal reparations. And when you speak to Black communities, everyone in community has a different example of what repair means to them. So I'll go through this very quickly because it may not be that interesting. But tell me here who's interested in policy work in their futures. Policy, want to be a legislator, elected, advocate. Everybody in here based on the values of this school that I read, right? And I love it. So in 2022, I acknowledge Judge Jean-Baptiste, a Haitian immigrant who at the time was an Evanston City Councilman, and he introduced the passing of our first reparations legislation. In 2018, something else important happened. This is an era, it should read, that we passed our Equity and Empowerment Commission, a commission that was appointed by our mayor to address equity issues and diversity issues, goals. In 2019, we began our discussion. In February, in fact, is when I made the initial introduction on reparations. And then we went through a long process, many community meetings, public meetings, receiving feedback through town halls, through surveys, through social media, however we could get it. We wanted to hear from the Black community. And then in November of 2019, we passed Resolution 126R19. It established a few things: the Reparations Fund. It established how we would fund it initially, $10 million of recreational cannabis sales tax, and there's a whole nother issue of cannabis and how that is further impacting the Black community. We are now also using real estate transfer taxes to fund reparations. It also established the priorities based on community feedback. We are focusing on housing, economic development, and educational initiatives. And the initiative has grown. As mentioned in the introduction, we have committed an additional $10 million. But the process continued with more public meetings, town halls, and I'll tell you the most important thing that we've done and will need to continue doing is public education. Understanding what reparations is, that it's not novel, that it is possible, seeing that reparations is happening in all kinds of ways for all other marginalized situations and communities but Black folks. The United States government and other governments have no issues with paying reparations to everybody but Black folks. And so continuing education is going to be important. Other things, important things happen. A community organization that is taking ownership of reparations formed. Our local community foundation has funded that. Our faith community has stepped up in a major way. Anyone here in the faith community? A believer? Any faith, any denomination? Yes. Shout out to the faith community because the faith community is really leading. Yes. Has stepped up to take ownership and accountability. In the case of Evanston, within a matter of 6 months of organizing our interfaith community, only 18 churches raised $1 million contributions to contribute to the reparations fund, as well as produce white papers, toolkits, and so on how to be an ally, how to exercise and practice reparations based on scripture, lessons, and all faiths, largely being led by our Jewish community, one particular Rabbi Andrea London at Beth Emmet Synagogue. But since then, we've done some exciting things. We have identified our recipients, we have dispersed our initial reparations, and we have received incredible feedback from those recipients and their families on what they believe is possible for the life circumstances of Black people in Evanston and now in America because of how much momentum and replication we've seen from what we've done in Evanston. Now, this is what's really important. How can you be involved? What can you do today as a scholar, as an activist, as a member of your community in whatever way, whether it's faith or so on? What can you do? Everyone has a role, and that's why these slides are the most important. Everyone has a role. First of all, the Black community's role is to inform reparations, prescribe it, make the case, make the demand. That can be on an individual basis. It could be if you're part of a legacy organization like NAACP or some other type stakeholder group. Legal. Anyone here, we have any future attorneys, any future legal professionals? Yes, we need you. We need you to help us craft a legal framework that is viable, work around dated and racist judicial systems that keep us from having race-based policy. We need you, and they played a very important role in the successes and milestones that we're seeing right now. Government, any future government leaders, any student government leaders here, right now, we need you. We need a legislative response. All of our issues here in America are policy decisions. We need legislation that speaks to the values and the mountaintop. National reparation organizations, there are a couple out there have been doing this work for 35 years, and COBRA is one of them. Local historians, who here is a historian? Who's a historian buff? One over here, yes. We need you to make the case. And I disagree that the case means we need 18 months or 24 months to study how oppressed Black people are and what's the history. The history is clear, we know it. It's not up for debate. We see the outcomes of it in our data, right? We see the racial wealth gap. In my city, it was $50,000 per household. In one of the cities that we worked with, Boston, $200,000 per household. But the case still needs to be made. And in the case of Evanston, we had a wonderful historian, much like yours here, that was able to put a report together in 2 weeks so that we could accelerate our work. Financial institutions are needed, of course, to think about how we fund it and to redress predatory lending practices and other sort of plunder that happen from financial institutions. And then allies. Anybody not Black, show up. Use the same energy in the room of advocacy that you're in those rooms where we're not at and reparations is unpopular. That same energy, use it there. Share the case, share a resource. We have a toolkit, and it includes how to be an ally, how to lead a life of repair. What does that look like? Maybe you're not able to pass legislation, or maybe you aren't thinking about a legal framework, but you can shop Black. You could be a conscious consumer. You could think about who you hire, elect, appoint. Those things you can do. That is reparative action. All of us can do something. Researchers. Not just the case for reparations, but reports on what reparations can do to transform Black America, repair it, remedy the harm, but also how that uplifts the entire nation or the community that's doing reparations. And when I began this work in 2019, there was a report. It was the Cost of Segregation report. It was done by the Metropolitan Planning Council, and it used Chicago, Illinois as an example, and it showed that if Chicago addressed its discrimination and its segregation, it would be about a $4 billion increase to Chicago GDP. There would be $1 million additional household income for Black families. Neighborhood crime and violence would be reduced because that's just a symptom of poverty, and poverty is a symptom of what? Racism, right? So that report and that type of research is very valuable to the reparations movement. We need it. We need it now, actually, even in Evanston, we need more reporting. And the important research partners have been the academy, you as an example. In our case, Howard University and Columbia University together form African American Redress Network. They have been very helpful, but universities are needed, scholars are needed. And then philanthropy. Philanthropy has America's wealth, and much of America's wealth is a product of stolen labor of Black folks, right? More vestiges and legacies of the transatlantic slave trade. And so we've had the philanthropic community now get involved in the reparations conversation by contributing to the work. And that is great, because for decades, the reparations movement has been volunteer group, under-resourced, working part-time. I've been in meetings, we work until midnight because we can't all get there till 9 because we've had to work and, take care of families and so on. So philanthropy is beginning to get involved, but there needs to be a next step in beginning to pay reparations. And so I've been challenging the philanthropic community to do just that. And then local reparations is what we do at First Repair specifically. So there was mention of I don't want to get to that. There was mention of a documentary, and if you haven't seen it, has anyone here seen The Big Payback? Perfect. Okay, one person's seen it. So there's a great opportunity for you to see the possibilities and the complexities of implementing reparations. That's through a documentary called The Big Payback. It's still available for streaming. There's no cost. It's on PBS through the end of April. And after that, it'll go everywhere, Hulu and Apple TV and all of that. So please do consider watching that. And it really shows the story of what happened in Evanston. And it's very fair. It doesn't just show the milestones and the celebration. It shows even the opposition, the inner community debate, even Black folks against reparations. Some Black folks want you to, pull your bootstraps up and get it because they got it and that sort of thing. And some Black folks have very strong opinions about what reparations is. They only want a check. They only want cash. And who's wrong? Nobody, because all these forms are needed for reparations. It also shows the expected opposition on white supremacy. And Black people should not have any benefit that everybody else has because slavery was so long ago and I didn't have a slave and therefore, and so on. So it's very fair. It also shows the emotions of the community receiving reparations as well. So a couple of things I wanted to add is the political issue around reparations. And we talked a little bit about how reparations are possible. But in my time as a fellow at UChicago, my series is called The Road to Reparations. And I've had my thought partners in. And just yesterday, actually, at my seminar, I had in the faith community, a rabbi, a Baptist preacher, and another preacher. And they talked about how they come at it is not really getting into the political discussion, not the legislative discussion, staying in their lane, the ethical issue, the scriptures in that case. Why reparations? Because it's righteous, it's justice, before getting to the call of a legislative action. And so they have found great successes in just educating congregations on why ethically reparations are due. But really in any role that you're in, whether it is even the legal community, we talked about it, government and legislation, community, it's justice. So there is a path forward for reparations if you get past the political issue, because once you bring that in, and you'll see that even in local initiatives and even with the federal government case, it's a partisan, very partisan issue. I don't know one that is more so than reparations, right? And with that, it gets in the way. It's a distraction. Let's talk about the core values of harm, theft, repair, right? Justice. Let's talk about that. So that's why education, more public education for communities has been necessary. And so one thing we're doing at First Repair, and I would love your help as you have time, is we have developed a workshop for high schoolers facilitated by college students for communities. And at the end of the 2.5-day workshop, you produce a couple things, a legislative recommendation and a social media campaign for public education around reparations. And so I can't wait to talk more with Professor Kevin on that, and hope to hear from you as it relates to reparations and how you can advance it. You, our future leaders, our current leaders, as far as I'm concerned. Our work is not done without your thought and without your input. And just being at another college campus, Amherst College, last week, hearing from students on how can we get involved? Well, you just get involved. Because we are waiting on you. We cannot properly do this work without you. Our outcomes are based on what your needs and your demands are. We don't even know how to properly communicate. You have access to, social platforms and technology and so on. This work must be intergenerational. And I can't stress that enough to my colleagues, especially in a space where I'm among the youngest in the fight, and I am an actual grandmother, okay? Yeah, I am. It's okay. But my point is that the movement needs your young thought. It needs your boldness, the audacity that you have, the way that you share information. We need you. We need your thought. Are we on the right track? Are we missing what repair looks like to you? I have shared in that word cloud what repair looks like to community, but guess who's showing up? The elders are showing up. They're telling us what repair looks like to folks that are 60 and older. What does repair look like to you? And I hope before I leave here, I hear from some of you so I could take this information back and say we need to even expand our thought of what repair looks like, because we have not heard enough from our young minds and our leaders of today. Perfect. So this trailer is just a couple minutes. In a couple minutes, it shows you how complicated the conversation is. It shows you that it takes patience and it takes balance. And as soon as the trailer is done playing, I'm going to talk quickly about balance and wellness if you're doing social justice and racial justice work, because it can be taxing. And so we'll talk about that right after the trailer before I conclude.
It should be cash payment. I think what they're offering us is an insult.
How do you determine who's supposed to get it?
Yeah, I don't think reparations for something that happened 150 years ago is a good idea.
HR 40 is pushing very hard. There's been a lot of debate and discussion about the bill.
This is a proposal for reparations for the institution of slavery. Yes. The institution of slavery has never gone away.
Convict leasing,
The oppression of voting.
poll taxes, and racist GI bills.
HR 40 is in fact the response of the United States of America long overdue.
Have values and stick to them and take the space and time that you need. And with that, I'm going to close and leave space for questions, because I'm most excited about the questions that are going to come from you. So thank you.
Hello, my name is Jordan Whitehead. I'm part of the PEL Learn and the PEL Major. Yes, sir. And also PEL Major. I had a question. Which one, if you had to pick an option, which approach is best, money or other means of reparations? My thought process that if we had a national reparations as far as money, it would be compromised. You would end up getting a small amount. Say, hey, look, racism over. That's why I'm a little bit leery, but I'm curious what you think.
So I'm going to share my personal opinion, and I'm going to have a disclaimer that I'm not prescribing any community to do anything. But I do agree more with you that a cash payment without policy reform, systems change around it, cooperation from other institutions. Like if we had a cash payment and we didn't address predatory lending and access to businesses and information and procurement and so on, if we didn't address steering brokers that are still happening today, discriminating real estate appraisal practices. I mean, there's such a long list of things that need to be addressed. where a cash benefit without redressing some of those other harms is a stimulus in some ways. So I do agree with cash as a form of reparations, but if I had to choose one only, it would probably not be cash.
Hi, my name is Garvin. I'm a politics, economics, and law major, also vice president of the Politics, Economics, and Law Club. And to expand on what you've already touched on, you mentioned financial literacy on like your thought cloud. And kind of where Jordan was, my take on it is, but I personally agree we should get cash. Well, those that qualify to get cash should get cash. But also what comes with that should be like financial literacy, because as like a trauma response or lack of financial literacy, you might lose it just as fast as you got it. So what do you think about that?
I agree with you. But we have to be careful that we aren't giving direction on how people use their benefit. But I do agree, and that's why my response is a more comprehensive approach. And it's no fault of ourselves. It's not that we have poor economic habits because we are just careless. We haven't had access to the best opportunities, and then we are still inheriting all this trauma that is informing the decisions that we make. So yes, I agree with you. And financial literacy comes up in every community.
My name is Kausar Mubin. I'm a PEL mentor, and I want to thank my classmates for coming and my professors. And thank you for coming. And my question is there any effort by the federal government or from the Congress about reparations? And have you ever spoken with I have seen Congresswoman Sheila Jackson. Have you ever spoken with any Congress members, and what if you have talked about reparation?
So thank you for the question. I work in tandem with Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, and we have spoken, and I've spoken to my own Congress people and others. There is not a political appetite to pass a HR 40, which is the bill to study slavery and its legacies and develop remedy proposals. And so this past Congress closed with 217 yes votes in the House. It had a Senate companion bill, S40, introduced by Senator Cory Booker. A president and vice president both say that they support the study of reparations, but still no commitment for a House vote when the votes are there. This nation is in a terrible place in terms of its politics. And so that's keeping the will and commitment, sort of the boldness from a House vote for HR 40. And so what's happening locally is very much being supported by Congress people that are in support of reparations nationally. They're seeing it as a tool towards a national effort. And when we really look at all of our national efforts, transformative legislation like school desegregation, marriage equality, ban the box, now even cannabis being a federal conversation, it usually starts with the local action. So now we're looking at this as the same, as a federal policy, the North Star, but as a responsibility at a local level to build on the case.
Yes, Jordan again. I'm glad that you brought up redlining as far as segregation and racism in housing. We had an event last semester that covered that, but I wanted to broach, has anyone ever come up with maybe eliminating the property tax? Because while some people may be able to afford a house, here on Long Island, the property taxes are astronomical. And also, this is, at one point, was the second most segregated suburb in America. So there's a barrier, even if you were able to buy a house. You may be in a town where the property tax is $20,000. This area where the school is the second richest area on Long Island, second richest, one of the highest in the nation. I don't even imagine how much the property tax is here with the equestrian farms. So what's the position as far as eliminating the property tax so everyone has access?
It is an excellent question, and it has been recommended by some folks. It took a whole lot of time to come up with that as a recommendation. It's not been accomplished yet. So when municipalities, and we also have to understand how a bill is passed, what's in whose purview and that sort of thing. So when that recommendation came up at the city level, we don't govern property taxes. It's a county matter. So that's why all levels of government need to be working together. Even with reparations at a municipal level, cash benefits and taxation being a federal issue. So we can't govern how taxes are applied to a cash benefit. Same thing with property taxes. And so yes, in our city, we're very much alike. Cook County leads in being one of the highest taxing bodies. And we have overassessed property taxes in the Black neighborhoods. So not only do we have deteriorating housing stock, and then predatory lending on top of that, and then discrimination in wages. So everything's already a struggle. And then on top of that, you have the county that has overassessed our taxes, making our taxes more higher and making our mortgages unaffordable. And then here we are now again losing our houses. So yes, to your point, and that's why we need all of you helping us think about legislation and advocacy at every level of government, because they all work together.
So I just had a comment, and I think it was related to Jordan's last comment here. Jermaine Archer, professor here, this was amazing. This was phenomenal. And one of the things and you've answered every question I have in my mind. You're like answering it. And Jordan's question about the local here in Long Island, and your answer speaks to the reason why we must all get involved, because there are local things here locally that our own sort of reparations, how does it matter for Long Island? As one of the historians here, and I have some students in my classes, I've been working on reparations for a while in a broad sense. I'm part of membership organizations. Kevin and I, have a fluidity of conversations about this topic, and not working in the way that this giant of a force has worked on reparations, but on the periphery. And what I can say when I teach, and I'm a professor of the 19th century, so when I teach slavery and slave resistance, a lot of the companies today, and she knows this very well, a lot of the companies today that we may have stock in or we may consume, their names have changed. So if you look at the companies that are around us, and the data's out there. The data was out there 15 years ago when I went to a big conference on reparations. My grandmother worked on reparations in part. My father, a graduate of this institution, is working on reparations in Costa Rica today for people to get their land back, right? So the institutions, the insurance companies, the banks, and a number of institutions today, when you look at the history, the conversation on reparations opens up in a whole nother way. But our local environment, Old Westbury is different from, SUNY Old Westbury may be different from the surrounding Old Westbury community. That's George's question, and in the response, what she's been saying is that we must get involved. And in response to money being the need and what they won't give and what they will not do, well, first of all, we have to know that there are companies around us today that are still profiting.
That's right.
That were built on slavery, so what do you mean
right.
what they won't do? First, we have to understand what they're still doing. Because we think that this is about something yesterday, like, oh, it's still happening today.
That's right.
And so she knows local politics where she's at, and she can steep into Long Island pretty quickly. She can get it. but she's asking you to get it, right? She's asking you to get with your local environment. So what's your Long Island? What's your borough, right? So it's about Jordan's question. Do we know Long Island? Do we know SUNY Old Westbury? She locked in our mission. Social justice, intercultural understanding, right? So don't follow her, right? Follow you.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Thank you for that. Thank you so much for that. And I just want to add, if you're interested in learning, there is a framework that's speaking about what the professor just mentioned. It's called slavery disclosures, and cities have passed slavery disclosures. Chicago has one, Philly has one. They're all over the nation. They came out of the Durban conference, and it is where those doing business with your municipality or your institution, it could be the college, have to disclose their relationship to slavery. The problem with all those slavery disclosure ordinances, which were brilliant, there's no accountability. So, okay, you disclose it and then you still get the $1 million contract and you move on. So now there is a new effort to work on a second part of accountability where there has to be some sort of some response, some sort of reparative justice if you are doing business with the institution and you have some connection to slavery. So thank you for bringing that up. Mm-hmm.
My name is Naya. I'm a PEL major, senior. And my first question would be, one, how would you go about holding politicians or people accountable for their actions or towards bringing about reparations? And two, how would you were talking about predatory loans. Mm-hmm. How exactly are predatory loans so detrimental towards the Black community?
Okay, huge questions. The first is, how do you hold elected officials accountable? And as serving as an elected official for 4 years, I could tell you that sometimes we have the wrong approach, like yelling and name calling, and it just doesn't get you anywhere. But one thing that has been very helpful is when you have a plan and a willingness to help. And going to your elected official and saying, this is the issue, this is what we think is possible, how do we help you accomplish that? Very different than, you didn't and blah, blah, and now I'm going to pick at you and so on, and now you guys aren't even talking to each other. So I have really appreciated, and when I have people come to me with critique, great. Just had it today. Before I came here, I had to chair our reparations committee meeting. People come and say, well, we don't even have a great. I'm establishing a new working group and you are the chair of it. Report back in a month. Let me know how I can help you help me, help us. So being helpful, I think, is always going to be my response, offering that help and knowing that your elected official, oftentimes they need to do better. I'm going to keep it really real. They're not doing enough. They're not thinking enough. They're not collaborating enough. They're not bold enough. They're compromised. It's campaign season. It's all of that. But sometimes they're just stretched, especially coming out of COVID. Everything is an emergency right now. And they have all good intentions, but sometimes don't even know how to do it, don't know how to connect the dots. So I would just say be as helpful as you can. And then in terms of how is predatory lending a problem for the Black community, because it is theft. It is taking away our wealth. If we're both able to buy, let's say that we have solved the issue of realtor steering still. That's still happening today. Let's say we solve that. But then you and our white friend go buy the same house, and then we have a 10% rate and they have a 2% rate, then how much more is our mortgage payment? And that is wealth that is coming out of, that's at least income that's coming out of our household. And that income could be used to generate wealth through some other way. Maybe you're buying more properties. Maybe you're investing in a business. Maybe you're saving it so that you can age in place in your property. So that's how it is. It is stealing wealth from Black people. I thought I saw a question over here somewhere. But yes, over here. Yeah.
Right, so hi, I'm Amira Crystal, and I'm a PEL major and also a philosophy major with the Community Action Psychology minor, and I am the president-elect of the Student Government Association and the founder and president of the Students Against Social Injustice on campus.
Let's pause there and say congratulations. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And thank you for your leadership.
Oh, thank you for your leadership. It's like indispensable work. But I just had a question about, like, of course, this isn't, no amount of reading is going to fully substitute, like, learning and from learned experience and lived experience. But if you were to give a recommendation on any media, preferably books, about the topic in general or very specific to, like, up-and-coming activists, what would you recommend?
It's such a long list because some of the reparations readings aren't going to be titled reparations at all. So I would say that if you're brand new to the conversation, a nice entry point is Ta-Nehisi's article, "The Case of Reparations." Right? That's the name. "The Case of Reparations" is a great starting point. It's easy. It's an article, and if you more contemporary reading, I love Nicole Hannah-Jones' 1619 Project. It shows in so many areas how we have been harmed, continue to be harmed, and she has different media formats. She's also turned it into a documentary series, so if you prefer to consume your information in video and movie format more so, it's on Hulu. I would definitely recommend her book, The 1619 Project, and then you can also enjoy it in a documentary form. But at firstrepair.org, we actually have a resource page that has other recommended books. More specifically to local reparations, if you're interested in sort of challenging your cities, there is Laying the Foundation for Local Reparations. It's authored by Cam Howard, a colleague of mine, and it shares how you can take sort of strategic steps towards local reparations, and we're looking to synchronize those efforts. So all of our localities, we're working together to ultimately get to that national goal of reparations initiative. Any final questions? Over here. Oh, yes.
Hi, my name is Tom Delgees. I teach in the PEL, Politics, Economics, and Law program. So it's got to be the most partisan of all issues, right?
Yes.
You mentioned that, and I believe that's probably true. So how difficult is it within the African American community to kind of focus on a particular form, a particular distribution, so that you kind of have solidarity to fight this fight? I mean, is it really difficult to bring the African American community together around particular forms of distribution?
So it wasn't difficult at all until it became political. So when we started the work, and it was those that cared about the work doing the work, we came to consensus. All those were recommendations. We led with housing first. Everybody was happy about it. But then, campaign season and this and that, and who is the messenger gets in the way. And when it becomes political, it becomes a lot more difficult. But even not using politics as an excuse, it's difficult nonetheless. Because especially each of us Black people in this room, we all have different life experiences. We are receiving our harm differently. We have different goals. We have different engagement with institutions. So those are going to inform kind of what we think repair should be like for us. And so it is difficult, but most communities can get to a consensus where we move forward. We had overwhelming consensus. Our initial vote was unanimous. Our next two votes were 8-1 votes in support and consensus. Yeah.
Thank
I
you, Brad.
Oh,
There's one more?
I thought right here. Yes. Yeah.
Hi, sorry. So I come from a family of people who say things like Mitch McConnell.
Okay.
And it's hard to have conversations with people who don't want to hear what people have to say about this. But I noticed that that's not the only place where this opposition comes from. We expect it from people like Mitch McConnell and Republicans, but I noticed the same opposition from Democrats too. It's really hard to get people on what's, I guess, kind of considered a fringe radical issue when I don't think it's radical at all. I think it's the right thing to do. How are you received by, obviously, like Republicans are not really going to receive well, but how do you, face people who are supposed to be on your side, right? Like Democrats are all hashtag Black they don't really want to actually follow that kind of stuff. How do you deal with that, and how do you get them on your side?
So keeping the lines of communication open and more education. And so when we introduced this, I had some folks that are, white residents and leaders that now are some of the most vocal supporters for reparations, but had pushback like it's not fiscally responsible. How will the city fund it? And then COVID came, and there was actually an introduction to not do reparations until COVID was over. And all the more reason to do reparations because of the disparate impact on the Black community. But more education on how we can do it, stripping away the conversation about it's a check and it is to strip away wealth and privilege from white people. Like, I think that allied communities that are in opposition, that's all that they're hearing. What am I going to have to sacrifice? And I think in showing the story, using the cost of segregation report as an example on how, first of all, is justice. Forget about righteous if that's not, you're not into righteousness. But it is possible, and you can do it and not tear the city down. And you can use other reparations examples that, the Japanese internment. You could look at the Holocaust and reparations there. You could look at Rosewood and other examples. But I would say it takes a lot of conversation and education. In my case, and I'll share with anybody that's interested, there was a really nice article done on kind of the negotiation tactics that I used to get it passed in a predominantly white community. And I should state that Evanston is only about 14% Black, so that you know that point. In who the messenger is. So in my case, I would use institutions. So as a Black woman, naturally I'm going to be supportive, but I would find partners, academic partners, other very respected thought leaders, congressional leaders, state leaders, that they may value their position more so than mine. Unfortunately, mine should have been enough, but it wasn't. And so those were some of the things that I did to get the support of my ally community that had reservations initially.